the Crimson Jest, the town that forgot laughter. In the autumn of 1978, the small coastal town of Dunhaven, nestled in the fog-shrouded cliffs of northern Scotland, was a place where joy seemed to have withered like the gnarled trees that lined its cobbled streets. Dunhaven was a town of whispers, of half-remembered tales, and of a peculiar silence that clung to the air like damp moss. The townsfolk, weathered by the relentless sea winds, rarely smiled. Laughter was a rarity, a sound so foreign it might as well have belonged to another world. At the edge of Dunhaven stood the remnants of a forgotten carnival ground, its skeletal structures looming like the bones of some ancient beast. The locals called it the Hollow, a name that carried the weight of decades of unease. Once, in the early 1900s, it had been the site of the Mirabilis Carnival, a traveling spectacle of acrobats, fire eaters, and a peculiar clown known only as Jester Crimson. His painted face, with its two-wide grin and eyes like twin voids, was the stuff of legend. His signature act involved handing out a single red balloon to the last child who lingered at the carnival's close. The Crimson Jest, they called it a gift, a game, a curse. The carnival had burned to the ground in 1913 under mysterious circumstances. Some said it was an accident, a stray spark from a fire eater's torch. Others whispered of darker causes, a ritual gone wrong, a debt unpaid. Whatever the truth, the fire claimed the entire troop, leaving nothing but ash and the faint echo of Jester Crimson's laughter. The Hollow remained abandoned, a place shunned by all but the most reckless children, who dared each other to cross its rusted gates. Yet, every 7 years, on the night of October 13th, the air in Dunhaven grew heavy, and the fog seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. The townsfolk locked their doors, shuttered their windows, and spoke in hushed tones of the jester's return. They said he never truly left, that his laughter lingered in the wind, and his red balloon floated just beyond the edge of sight. The boy who heard the laughter, Elliot Muir, was 16, a lanky boy with eyes too old for his years and a restless curiosity that made him an outcast in Dunhaven. His mother, a weary seamstress, had raised him alone in a crumbling cottage near the cliffs. She never spoke of his father, but her eyes darkened whenever Elliot asked, as if the question stirred something she'd rather forget. Elliot spent his days sketching the sea in charcoal, capturing its endless churn, and his nights wandering the town's empty streets, chasing stories no one else dared to tell. It was September of 1978 when Elliot first heard the laughter. It came on a moonless night, faint at first, like the giggle of a child carried on the wind. He was walking past the Hollow, his sketchbook tucked under his arm, when the sound stopped him cold. It wasn't joyful or warm, it was sharp, jagged, like glass breaking in slow motion. He stood frozen, his breath catching in his throat, as the laughter grew louder, closer, until it seemed to coil around him like a living thing. "Who's there?" he called, his voice trembling. The laughter stopped. Silence pressed against him, thick and suffocating. Then, from the shadows of the Hollow's rusted gates, a single red balloon floated into view, bobbing gently as if tethered to an invisible hand. Its surface gleamed unnaturally in the dim light, reflecting nothing but a deep, endless crimson. Elliot stumbled back, his heart pounding. He turned and ran. The balloon's image burned into his mind. When he reached home, his mother was waiting, her face pale and drawn. "Where were you?" she demanded, her voice sharp with fear. "Nowhere," he lied, avoiding her gaze. "Just walking." She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Stay away from the Hollow, Elliot. Promise me." He nodded, but the lie tasted bitter on his tongue. The laughter, the balloon, they called to him, pulling at something deep inside, something he didn't understand but couldn't ignore. The carnival's echo. The next day, Elliot couldn't shake the memory of the laughter. At school, he overheard whispers of the Hollow, stories passed between students in hushed tones. They spoke of Jester Crimson, of children who'd vanished after taking his balloon, of screams heard in the fog. Most dismissed it as folklore, but Elliot felt the truth in his bones. He began to dig. In the town's library, a crumbling building that smelled of mildew and neglect, he found a single photograph of the Mirabilis Carnival, dated 1912. The troupe stood in a semicircle, their faces painted and costumes garish, but it was the figure at the center that drew his eye, Jester Crimson. His grin was impossibly wide, his eyes black pits that seemed to stare through the photograph, directly at Elliot. In his hand he held a red balloon, its string dangling like a noose. Beneath the photograph was a caption, "The Crimson Jest, the final gift of the night." Elliot's obsession grew. He spent weeks combing through old newspapers, piecing together fragments of the carnival's history. The fire of 1913 had killed 32 people, including the entire troop. No bodies were ever recovered, only ash and charred props. One article mentioned a survivor, a young boy who'd fled the flames, clutching a red balloon. The boy's name was scratched out, the ink smudged as if someone had tried to erase his existence. Elliot's dreams began to change. Each night, he found himself standing in the hollow, surrounded by fog. The laughter returned, louder now, accompanied by the creak of a carousel and the distant wail of a calliope. In the center of the dream stood Jester Crimson, his painted face glowing under a blood-red moon. He held out the balloon, his voice a low, sing-song whisper. "Take it, lad, it's yours." Elliot would wake gasping, his hands clutching at nothing, the echo of that voice lingering in his ears. The night of October 13th. As October 13th approached, Dunhaven grew tense. The townsfolk avoided the hollow, and even the sea seemed to hold its breath. Elliot's mother became more withdrawn, her warnings about the hollow more desperate. "It's not a game, Elliot," she said one night, her voice breaking. "You don't know what's out there." But Elliot couldn't stay away. The laughter, the balloon, the jester, they were pieces of a puzzle he needed to solve. On the night of October 13th, under a sky heavy with clouds, he slipped out of the cottage, a flashlight in one hand and his sketchbook in the other. The air was thick with fog, the kind that swallowed sound and sight, leaving only the pulse of his own heartbeat. The hollow was silent when he arrived, its rusted gates creaking as he pushed them open. The carnival grounds were a maze of broken stalls and skeletal rides, their shapes distorted by the fog. Elliot's flashlight flickered, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to move on their own. He reached the center of the hollow, where a cracked stage stood, its velvet curtains long rotted away. The laughter came again, sudden and sharp, echoing from every direction. Elliot spun around, his flashlight beam cutting through the fog, but there was nothing, only the red balloon, floating just above the stage. "Jester Crimson," Elliot whispered, his voice barely audible. "Show yourself." The air grew colder, the fog thicker. The balloon drifted closer, its string trailing like a spider's thread. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. Jester Crimson was taller than Elliot had imagined, his frame gaunt and unnatural, his costume tattered but vibrant, as if untouched by time. His face was a mask of white paint, his lips stretched into a grin that showed too many teeth. His eyes were empty, not black but nothing, like holes punched through reality itself. "Take it," the jester said, his voice a low, musical rasp. He held out the balloon, its surface pulsing faintly, as if alive. Elliot's hand twitched, drawn to the balloon, despite the fear clawing at his chest. "What happens if I do?" he asked, his voice shaking. The jester's grin widened. "You'll see the carnival, lad, the real carnival, forever." "And if I don't?" The jester laughed, a sound that made Elliot's skin crawl. "Then you'll hear me, always." Elliot stepped back, his mind racing. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but the balloon held his gaze, its crimson surface reflecting not the fog or the stage, but something else, flashes of fire, of screaming faces, of a carousel spinning endlessly in the dark. "I don't want it," Elliot said, forcing the words out. The jester's laughter stopped, his head tilted, and for a moment, his face seemed to flicker, revealing something beneath the paint, something human, but broken, twisted, wrong. "You'll change your mind," he said, and then he was gone, the balloon vanishing with him. Elliot ran, his flashlight bouncing wildly, until he reached the safety of the town. But the laughter followed, faint but relentless, seeping into his dreams, his waking hours, his every thought. The truth beneath the paint. Days turned to weeks, and the laughter never stopped. It was in the wind, in the creak of the floorboards, in the silence between his mother's words. Elliot's sketches grew darker, filled with images of the jester, the balloon, the hollow. He stopped sleeping, his eyes hollow, his hands trembling. The townsfolk noticed, whispering about the cursed boy who dared to call the jester's name. Desperate for answers, Elliot confronted his mother. "What do you know about the hollow?" he demanded, slamming his sketchbook on the table. "Why are you so afraid?" She stared at the drawings, her face ashen. "I was there," she whispered. "In 1913, I was the child who took the balloon." Elliot's breath caught. You were the survivor." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I was 6. I didn't know what it meant. The jester gave me the balloon, and I ran as the fire started. I thought I'd escaped, but he's never left me. Every 7 years, he comes back, offering it again, and every time, I refuse." "Then why didn't you tell me?" Elliot shouted, his voice breaking. "Because I thought I could protect you," she said. "But you called him. You woke him. Elliot's world tilted. The jester wasn't just a ghost or a legend, he was a tether, a parasite, bound to those who took his gift. And now, Elliot was marked. The twist of the jest. Determined to break the cycle, Elliot returned to the Hollow on the next October 13th, 1985. He was no longer a boy, but a man, haunted by 7 years of sleepless nights and relentless laughter. He carried a knife, its blade etched with symbols he'd found in an old book of folklore, symbols meant to banish spirits. The Hollow was waiting, its fog thicker than ever, its silence heavier. The jester appeared without warning, his grin wider, his eyes emptier. "Back for the balloon, lad?" he asked, holding it out. Elliot lunged, driving the knife into the jester's chest. The blade passed through as if cutting air, but the jester staggered, his laughter turning to a scream. The balloon burst, and the fog erupted into flames not red, but white, blinding, consuming. When the light faded, Elliot was alone, the Hollow silent. The laughter was gone. He stumbled home, believing he'd won. But that night, as he looked in the mirror, his reflection grinned back, a grin too wide, too wrong. His eyes darkened, becoming voids. He tried to scream, but all that came out was laughter, sharp and jagged, like glass breaking in slow motion. The twist was complete. The jester hadn't been banished. He'd found a new host, the new jest. In 1992, Dunhaven's children began to whisper of a new figure in the Hollow, a man with a painted face, offering a red balloon to the last child of the night. They called him the Crimson Jest, and his laughter echoed through the fog, a sound that promised joy but delivered only madness. Elliot's mother vanished that year, her cottage empty, her fate unknown. The townsfolk locked their doors, but the laughter grew louder, closer, unstoppable. And in the Hollow, the red balloon floated, waiting for the next child, the next soul, to claim its gift. For the jester never leaves, he only changes faces.